Friends, the reading, if you have a Bible and you would like to follow, then it's from Galatians chapter 5, verse 1. Just one verse. But I'll be referring to other verses as well, so again, follow in the Bible if you'd like to. So Galatians chapter 5, verse 1 says, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." Today is the day we remember those who have given their lives or made a sacrifice through physical injury, through death, or even mental health damage by serving within the armed services. And as I looked through the internet, I was reminded that it isn't just about the world wars, but that our remembrance goes beyond those periods to current day, where there's conflict in so many areas of the world. When I I have to confess, if I didn't have a disability, being in the armed forces was something that would have really appealed to me, because I would have liked the discipline, because I don't have any, so they would have liked the discipline, but I always got the image, because I knew a fair few sort of people who were ex-forces, and the forces seemed to be an organization, if you could say that, where if you were good at something, that they seemed to encourage that and develop that to enable you to be the best that you could be in a particular area. My brother joined the RAF, and I remember him describing his 6 weeks basic training, where they basically break you into becoming the person they want you to be. They want to rebuild you. I feel like I want to do the $6 million man theme then. But using a wheelchair, that wouldn't really, I'd have to go too fast. I'm getting sidetracked on that. Anyway, but they rebuild you into the person they need you to be. And that principle, though, of breaking a person from all their modern comforts to being obedient and forming a tight unit where you are like a family. In one church where I used to lead, one of the members invited me to, I think at Earl's Court, and he used to meet some of his old unit, and he'd left them like 20 years ago, but they were still bound as this one unit, and they would get together and drink lots. I didn't want to be drunk in charge of a wheelchair. But this gives me lots of analogies, however, of what it means to follow Christ. And I'm going to look at just 3 characteristics of what my perception is of what it means to be in the forces. And that's one of discipline. And I'm going to associate discipline with discipleship, because I believe they're very similar. If you even look at the word discipline, disciple, ship, it's very close. Obedience, and finally sacrifice. But when I think of this whole thing of, being broken, to be remolded into the way either your forces want you to be, but for us as Christians, again, to be broken and remolded into the person that Christ wants us to be, I wonder how many of us are prepared to say yes to that. As a young Christian, I remember constantly asking, Lord, break me. I think there was a chorus, break me, make me, mold me. Is that right? Yes, yeah. The older ones, thank you. Sorry, Stu. Sorry, not so. But there was a song, break me, make me, mold me. And I used to sing that and thinking, yeah, Lord, break me into the person that you want me to be. And then when I was starting the process of ordination, actually the guy who was responsible for me said, actually, well, how can God break what he's already created? And so it made me think, actually, okay, maybe it's just saying to the Lord, remold me, into the shape that you want me to be. But to be remolded is painful. We're not talking often, when you think of that, of nice soft clay that will move very gently with our thumb or something like that, and go into the shape. No, most of us are a bit brittle, and we need a lot of soaking in the Spirit for him to come along and actually remold us into the shape that he wants us to be. That shape that is stronger, healthier. And when I say healthier, I'm not talking about the health and wealth gospel here. I'm talking about not holding on to any bitterness and being free to forgive, but being more loving, caring, gentle, kind, self-controlled, patient, etc. That's the person that I want to be more like Christ. Because I believe there's still so much for God to do with John Norday. And, sorry, but you too. Even you ones at home, sorry. But it's true, it's not until we get to heaven when we'll be perfect and we'll be able to worship him in full glory, when we will be the person that Christ wants us to be. But let's look at that first one of discipline, as I say, which I equate to discipleship. The need to be trained into the ways of following Christ. Or again, if you're in the armed forces, to be the person to be trained in following the commands of their commander. When Usain Bolt crossed over the 100-meter line of the Olympics in less than 10 seconds to win the gold medal at the London Olympics, those few seconds cemented his status as the fastest man in the world and placed him on the winner's podium once again and placed him on our TVs advertising Virgin Media. But actually the race was not won in those seconds. It was won by hours and hours of practice, workouts, weightlifting, special diets, and coaching. The race was not won in the performance, but in the preparation. And it's our desire for something greater that causes us, that wants us to be so disciplined, so dedicated to some things, even some good things, for the sake of something better. In Philippians 3, verse 14, Paul says, I press on towards the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. What's our desire for the race for Christ? Are we prepared to put in the hours, the dedication, the discipline? And what are the consequences, though, of doing those things? If we look at the passage, it says, it is for freedom. I know personally that when I look back over history and remember what was given up for me so that I might have freedom, Just to reassure you, I'm not old enough to have been around for the the Second World War, you know. But actually, Hitler didn't just send Jews to the gas chamber. In her book, Hitler's Forgotten Victims, the Holocaust and the Disabled, Suzanne Evans says between 1939 and 1945, the Nazi regime systematically murdered hundreds of thousands of adults and children with physical and mental disabilities. The euthanasia program was designed to eliminate anyone who, according to Nazi ideology, threatened the purity of the German race. I am alive because Nazism was defeated in the Second World War. Because if this country, as Will said, was being run by Nazis, we'd have people at the back monitoring what would be said, and I wouldn't be here. And maybe some of you might know people with learning disabilities, autism, dyslexia, other physical disabilities, sensory disabilities. They would be wiped away from this world. And the problem is actually that whilst we think, okay, that's gone, personally, I feel very threatened when I see on the news the rise of fascism or far-right political beliefs. Because part of that political belief is that if you are of the wrong race, the wrong sexual orientation, the wrong disability, the wrong country, if you're not blonde and blue-eyed particularly, then actually you're not part of the right people. And that's a threat. And it's still a threat today when we look globally of what's happening in the world. Freedom comes at a price. I am a recipient of that freedom because of those who gave their lives or suffered personal unseen consequences of fighting for their country. Remembrance Day is a time where we remember the liberty and the freedom that we have. But can you imagine just how precious you are that somebody was prepared to die for you? To give us the freedom and the liberty that we have now. Somebody died to do that. And they didn't know who was going to go ahead of them. But they fought and they died that we might have that, the principle of the freedom. It's amazing, though, even in countries where Christians are being persecuted, they may be bound, as I say, persecuted, dominated by the political system, yet these Christians know a freedom that they have through Christ, because he sets their hearts and minds free from the change and persecution they live in. It is Christ who ultimately sets us free from our sin. What's our response? Well, if we move on in the verse, it says, "Stand firm then. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then." And in Ephesians 6:13, before Paul talks about putting on the armor of God, he says, "Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand." It's after this declaration to stand that he then tells us what bits of the armor to put on. Standing requires courage. Our every instinct, I know my own instinct, would be to go in the opposite direction. Yeah? But then there's some people whose every instinct is to say, go, charge, and we'll go get them type thing. And the problem is, either one means we're on our own. If I run off on my own, well, it's John, and I'm an easy target. Again, if I go forward trying to fight the battle on my own, I'm an easy target. And Paul says, stand. Stand. The thing is, if we stand together, we are a unit. We're more powerful. The discipline that we have done helps us to be equipped to stand. We're equipped by our fellowship together, by offering love and support to each other. So disciplined discipleship equips us for the next phase, obedience. And I was struck in this verse that Paul uses the word again. Do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. When I was in Malawi, I remember somebody, they were a preacher, and they said that they loved looking at the little words of a passage sometimes, the ands and the buts, and because they can be very powerful in what actually the whole passage is saying. And again, when I look at this, I'm thinking, well, why is he using the word again here? See, the thing is, politically, we can forget the actions and the doctrine of fascism and the far-right groups. But I believe that it is a reminder for us to remember what those doctrines bring to us. Slavery and persecution. And as Christians, actually, we can forget the joy, the freedom that knowing Christ gives to us. We can over-exhaust ourselves with busyness, trying to earn God's love, when it's a free gift of grace to each one of us. And so we fall back on the old ways of actions, and I think of post-COVID. We may have fallen away from the discipline of coming to meet together. Will's not here, he's up in the youth, so I can tell you, because you won't tell Will. Okay, but I remember, when we were watching the on-stream service, thinking, what am I going to do when it comes to getting up early and getting to church again? I was thinking, I'm so used, it's nice, I could sit there in my pajamas watching the service, with my tea and my toast, watching it. This is very good, and it was very good, it was brilliant. But I realized, I was thinking, when we get back to meeting again, it's going to be hard, actually. I get here for 9:30 normally, and I know the worship team and the tech team, they get here by 8:30. You're amazing, guys. Thank you. But, the rest of us, you normally turn up at 10:30 or thereabouts. And it was so easy just to stay at home. And again, those of you online, please, this is not a nag at you, okay? This is where I grovel for a moment, so excuse me, okay? But actually, it's not. But it does beg the question for us, have we lost that discipline of actually getting up again and coming to church? But obedience is saying, actually, it's good to be in fellowship. The writer of Hebrews says, do not give up the habit of meeting together. Because we need each other. We encourage each other. It's lovely seeing you. And I can't see you at home. But it's lovely seeing you here. It really is. But the Christian faith is not a faith we live out on our own. We need everyone to help us and support us. Paul uses the word burdened again by the yoke of slavery. And we may feel like we've got used to this new way of being, of living, by going back to the old habits, the old actions. But actually they do become a burden. They begin to enslave us, where we no longer know the freedom of knowing Christ and the freedom that he brings into our lives. In Romans 5, Paul says the following in verse 6 onwards. It says, "You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us." Whilst we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He doesn't wait for us to get perfect and then die for us. He takes us as we are. He loves us as we are and says, "I'm prepared to die on the cross for you." But let me tell you there, it's like he's saying, it doesn't finish there, because I've got so much good for your life ahead. So much good. You know, he wants to bring life in its fullness to us. Now, I know in various parts of the world there are regimes where there is no freedom, and that the people are held in slavery, unable to receive education, unable to vote, unable to be the person to reach their potential because of corrupt, totalitarian dictatorships. And the UN forces may try and come in and bring some peace and stabilization in those countries, but there are inevitable consequences. And I want to tell you about one person. His name's Tyler. I play wheelchair basketball with Tyler. Tyler served in the armed forces in Afghanistan. And Tyler lost, he had to have both below his knees amputated. He has lost some of his fingers, and he lost one eye. And he plays wheelchair basketball. I haven't got a clue how he does, the whole thing of perception, of knowing distance, and somehow he catches the ball and shoots and stuff like that, I'm thinking, how do you do that when you've only got, forget, the restrictions again of having fewer fingers to catch the ball, But he made the sacrifice. And I don't know what mental anguish actually he may go through, when it comes to sleep, that he doesn't have it. I've never asked him that question, or his wife for that matter. But I see him and I think, Tyler, you were serving in the forces and you lost all those abilities through an IED. And he holds no bitterness. He's a really soft, gentle soul. So it's not just those who've lost their lives, it's people who've lost limbs and the mental anguish as well that comes through conflict, serving in the armed forces. But he was obedient in his role as a soldier, and with it came some major consequences. Are we prepared to be obedient to Jesus, to face the consequences of being different from our colleagues, from our family, from our friends, to stand out from the crowd. And so finally, we've had discipleship, discipline, discipleship, obedience, and then sacrifice. Sacrifice is the final aspect I want to look at. Again, Galatians 5:1 says, Paul reminds us that it is freedom that Christ has set us freedom. Freedom not to enslave us to the law like the Pharisees and try and be good people because we think that's the way we earn God's love. The Romans 5 passage says that God demonstrated his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's amazing. That as rotten, I mean, I think you're lovely, okay, but I don't see the inside of you, okay? But we are rotten. Sin corrupts us. And yet Christ died for you and me because he loves us so much. And I was struck in this verse, though, that Paul uses, that, as I said, the word again. Do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. Because it does. When we go the way of the world, it is enslaving us. Freedom, as Mel Gibson may have shouted in Braveheart, comes at a consequence. Our remembering of those people through 2 minutes of silence seems a small act of appreciation to remember the sacrifices that they have made. During World War II, a young soldier named David Webster of the 101st Airborne Division, American Forces, wrote to his mother. He said, "Stop worrying about me. I joined the parachutists to fight. I intend to fight. If necessary, I shall die fighting. But don't worry about this, because no war can be won without young people dying." Well, in those days, young men dying. "Those things which are precious are saved only by sacrifice." And as we remember those who have sacrificed their lives one way or another, it is done through the discipline, their discipleship, their obedience, and the sacrifice that these individuals have gone through to prepare them for the battle that they were going to be engaged in. Those who sacrifice themselves for the sake of something better. Not just for themselves, but for others. We, I believe, are called to follow that example. Not just the example of the armed forces, but actually the example of Christ Jesus. He is the one we follow into battle. Because being a Christian is not easy. It's a hardship. And are we prepared to go out of our comfort zones and make our lives one of discipline, obedience, and sacrifice? Being a Christian, as I say, is not the easy life. Being in the forces is not an easy life. Yet we are called to face the challenges ahead and stand firm. Are we prepared to put the discipline in? Are we prepared to be obedient? I think that word obedience, it's such a hard word because it means putting Christ above, whether we're watching the TV and we decide, okay, no, I need to be praying for somebody. I need to get up early to come to church. I need to give my time to care for somebody. You will know hundreds of examples. So what is our response to the freedom we have been given? Do we sit back and not express our appreciation in praise and worship? By coming and standing together to take on whatever the enemy wants to throw at us. Because on our own, we're more likely to fail. But together, we're a mighty army. A mighty army. Because we've got Christ with us. Are we prepared to be disciplined, deliberate in our actions, prepared to be obedient and serve Christ where he wants us to serve him? And finally, are we prepared to make the sacrifices that comes with following Christ? As Jesus said in Luke 9:24, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it." Amen.